AFC South. Going through what y'all need to know to make some money on this bitch. So this division, a lot different than last year. It's going to be a lot different for some obvious reasons. But yeah, a lot of new quarterbacks here, obviously, 3 of the 4, and a lot of draft picks outside of the Texans here. You see, that's gonna make this stuff look a lot different. But let's get into it. First, Houston Texans, the only team of all of them in the whole league that I have get to 10, and I had to do a double column on there, and a good reason for that. Now, obviously, you see number 1 quarterback. I'm not going to talk about the Deshaun Watson thing. That ain't nothing I know nothing about personally. So that is what it is. It's there if you don't play, obviously. Quarterback's number 1. Tyrod Taylor should not be a starter in 2021. Yeah, moving past that, though. The rest of this stuff, there's some real big holes here. Now, they do a decent job of signing veteran free agents this offseason that all can play to varying degrees. They didn't really sign any impact guys, which is a little different than like the Patriots who did a similar thing, but signed just better players. Here, they just kind of signed guys who can function with on an NFL field, but who don't necessarily provide a lot above and beyond that. Number 1 need, though, corner. Like I said, I mean, they have the same guys who've been burned constantly over the last couple of years there still. Now, they are healthier with Bradley Roby, Garrett Conley, both missed most of the year last year back. And especially Conley, I think, can play at least a little bit, but neither of them are elite. They both have significant injury issues. We'll see if they actually are on the roster going into the offseason. And past that, they have literally nothing. Vernon Hargreaves, worst corner in the league. They signed Desmond King, who, grant you, is a decent slot corner and maybe is a little bit undervalued, isn't necessarily a difference maker. And more, I'm talking about on the outside here anyway, where, like I said, past those 2 I mentioned, they just have absolutely nothing. Strong safety, really similar situation. The only player on roster who played really last year, A.J. Moore, who was hurt at the very beginning of the year, is not very good. Actually, I should say they bring back Eric Murray, too, another player you do not want playing. Neither guy provides anything. They're both going to be exploited in coverage repeatedly. Really just a huge hole and nobody to fill it on the roster as of now. And that's including, I know they bring in Terrence Brooks, who was not good as a dime linebacker for the Patriots last year. Center, again, Justin Britt comes out of basically forced retirement because nobody wanted him last year. And as of right now, I guess he's expected to be their starting center. I'm not totally sure who else they would move around. They have some other interior guys there, but none of them good. And that's a huge spot of need. I mean, there's just nobody there. Wide receiver, I mean, I like Brandon Cooks and Randall Cobb both quite a bit, actually. I think they're both talking about really undervalued in terms of their skill level and talent across the NFL. And at the high end, they are okay, but it's another situation where, past them, there's nothing. Chris Conley should not be a starting receiver in the NFL at all. They bring him in. They sign guys like Dante Moncrief and Chris Moore from the Ravens. Just players who are not relevant outside receivers or even close to it. So they really need talent at receiver spots. Showed last year, too, especially with injuries, given Brandon Cook's history, obviously. It's a big spot of need. Then we got linebacker, and same story. You have Zach Cunningham at the top, who's fine. You can definitely work with him, but he's not exactly a killer back there. And then you bring in Christian Kirksey, who's injury prone and just average when he plays. Camus Grugier-Hill, who should not be playing. Kevin Pierre-Louis, who should not be playing. The one I am a little bit interested in, I will say, is Joe Thomas from the Cowboys, who actually stepped in for them last year after Leighton Vander Esch's injury and was the better linebacker on that team. And he could, I think, be fairly similar to what Tyrell Adams provided for the Texans last year, but again, not a player that I'm necessarily excited about or that I care for in terms of a defensive difference maker, which is completely missing on this team. Defensive tackle here, I had this a lot higher before I kind of looked at the signings they made, and they've made some decent ones here, specifically Malik Collins and DeMarcus Walker, both legitimately useful players, neither of them elite or anything, but guys who can penetrate the backfield and actually do a good job. Now, past that, you're looking at Ross Blacklock, who was really bad as a rookie. Maybe he'll get better. Charles Omenihu, who's just nobody really. Brandon Dunn, who I think is okay, especially as a run defender, but they still need depth there. They need really legitimate starters too. And it's just a less, important position on the ones in front of it, but still not good in that spot. Then tight end, I mean, they have a player in Jordan Akins, who I think if they used him right, could really develop into something. I don't necessarily expect them to. They consistently preferred Daniel Fells over the last couple of years to him, which I just pretty plainly disagree with. But, we'll see if they lean into it. They do trade for Ryan Izzo for some reason in the offseason, who's not a player, again, similar to a lot of players on this team, should be seeing any level of significant NFL snaps. And then the edge. Now here, this is the one spot with all their signings. I think they actually legitimately did do a good job of addressing the offseason. They found something in Jacob Martin last year, the guy it was 2 years ago, I suppose, the trade over from the Seahawks they got in the Jamie Clowney trade. He's legitimately a good pass rusher. Now, he lacks other skills for sure. He's pretty much a one-dimensional player, but that one dimension he's legitimately good at. So I have something there. They make a ridiculous trade for Shaq Lawson, most lopsided trade this offseason for sure. Bernard McKinney, not a relevant football player. Shaq Lawson, most certainly a relevant edge defender. So they got a starter there. They sign Jonathan Jenkins or Jordan Jenkins from the Jets, who also you can get away with a starter, not really pass rusher, but he's at least okay there. They bring in Derek Rivers, who showed a little bit of something for the Rams. And I mean, they have comparatively to the rest of the roster, at least some depth there, but still not great. And then guard is the last one, certainly not least. Now they do, I will say, bring in Lane Taylor from the Packers, who I thought was a really good player. He's had horrible injuries the last couple of years, so we'll see if he's the same or if he's even going to make the field. But at least there's something there. But past him, I don't know if they're going to move Max Sharpring back inside or Senio Kelemete. He's not exactly good himself. I mean, they're really struggling. The point is, this team outside of they have a good tackle duo and Brandon Cooks is good. Other than that, I mean, there's nowhere on this roster that you're happy with, really. And there's a reason. Even if Deshaun Watson was playing, this would be a really bad team last year, like you saw, or this year, like you saw last year, and a lot to fix on the Texans here. And then we got the Colts, and frankly, this is a team that has more holes than I think people are willing to admit at this point. It's been a positive, good roster over the last couple of years, certainly, but this is not the elite, super talented, deep roster that I think a lot of people make it out to be, the way that, older teams like the Jaguars, Vikings of years ago were. This team has some holes. It really does. And that number one, obviously, if you know anything about the Colts, is left tackle. Anthony Costanzo retires in the offseason, and they have absolutely nobody on roster that is a relevant replacement. They do bring in Sam Tevy, who has been a right below mediocre starter on the Chargers for a couple of years. Not someone who, if you want to be a good team, you want starting left tackle. And yeah, very clearly the number one there. But number two here, I know it's getting talked about a little bit, but is really just as big. And they just have no edge rushers that are good at all. Al-Qadim Muhammad, I will say, is a really good edge defender, really, really good player against the run, but not a pass rusher to even the remotest degree. And past him, you just have disappointing guys in Ben Banogu, Kamoko Toure, who haven't really been relevant players in the field. Toure, at least a little bit, you maybe could see something, but bad injuries himself, and that signing of Isaac Rochelle doesn't do anything really to fix that. So they really need edge rush help, like real bad, if they want to be, again, any level of good. Wide receiver, another big hole. You have one. Well, it's hard to even say you have one for sure good player. You have some guys are going to be useful in certain ways. Michael Pittman did show some things as a rookie that I'm fairly confident in saying he's at least a piece going forward. T.Y. Hilton, very limited at this point. Fits in the spectrum of Christian Kirk receivers of just not being good but being useful because they're fast. Now, he is better in a lot of other ways, especially against zone coverage for sure, don't get me wrong, but not necessarily a difference maker. Someone who's consistently getting open against man coverage at this point in his career. Zach Pascal can do a little bit as an underneath guy. Paris Campbell, I was excited about last year. I still am. His speed is just enough for him to be useful even if he sucks, and he doesn't suck. He actually has some skill too. I think if he stays healthy, you're going to see a lot more out of him this year, but point is, it's nobody you care about. It's just nobody that's here that you're saying is going to beat coverages consistently outside of, like I said, some okay use against underneath zone, which really only gets you, that don't get you super far, especially being that your new quarterback is Carson Wentz. So big deal there. Past that though, so those first three big holes, they need to fix them or they're not going to be good, basically. But the rest of these, you can definitely get away with what's on the roster. I will say overall, despite me kind of roasting it a little bit earlier, this roster is not doing too bad. It's still in better space than some other teams are. Texans on the last slide is as you can see. But here, I mean, their strong safety spot is not strong. Really, Kari Willis, not really a good starter. He's not horrible, but a player you could upgrade on fairly comfortably, fairly easily. Linebacker, they lose Anthony Walker as their third linebacker, and that's a big deal. They still have two very, very good ones, Darius Leonard and Bobby Okereke, both really good. But now they're down to backups who are, very, very notable for their special teams play, not so much for the defensive play, and that's a big spot in need. Tight ends, they lose Trey Burton, who was legitimately useful for them last year, and the guys they have, I really like Jack Doyle, but he's coming off a bad injury. As at his age, is he necessarily relevant receiver? Probably not. He's decent. And then Mo Alley Cox is, I get the meme potential of him, and he's not horrible, but he's not really a difference maker either. Interior defensive linemen past their top two, DeForest Buckner, Grover Stewart are both good. Then you're getting into real trouble. Maybe you could argue for Tyquan Lewis and Taylor Stallworth as being okay pieces, which I'm fine with, but neither of them really matter. Not necessarily guys who want to see get a ton of snaps at corner. I mean, is Xavier Rhodes going to play as well as he did last year? I actually think maybe, but opposite him, they're really not good. Rocky Sin is not a good player. TJ Carey's okay, but not super elite. And past those guys, you have no depth. After Kenny Moore, you have no depth in the slot. And at guard, even, listen, Quentin Nelson's pretty good, obviously, and people are going to, react to that because, listen, Quentin Nelson does still have his issues, despite how perfect everybody seems to think he is. And I'm not saying he's not really good. He's a top 3 guard comfortably in the NFL for sure, but he's not perfect. But more importantly, the other spot, Mark Lewinsky's not very good. He's the exact type of player that gets covered up with because he had elite or above average to good players around him the whole time he's been with the Colts. And while he's not horrible, you can replace him or get better than him very comfortably. In fact, I think with the signing of Chris Reed from the Panthers offseason, they probably already did. Now, they're not going to start him over him because of seniority, I would imagine. They're wrong for that. But definitely interesting spot there. And there's also, of course, the possibility of Quentin Nelson moving to left tackle, which I would be a fan of. I think they should definitely try that if they can't draft, one of the top rookies here. But listen, yeah, like I said, this roster, not altogether incredible, really. It's definitely an interesting spot, and they have a chance to be good for sure. But yeah, that's the Colts. And then we have the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I am a Jaguars fan, full disclosure. So just keep that in mind, whatever, when you listen to this. But what their needs, obviously, number one, they're going to take Trevor Lawrence. Don't want to talk about that too much. I will say Gardner Minshew is legitimately good. And whether he's a backup or on another team, this wouldn't necessarily be a need. If not, they weren't obviously going to take Trevor Lawrence, number one. Number two, listen, they need to stop starting AJ Cann. He's a actively bad player who hurts their offense. And while he did play a little bit better last year than he has previously, most of the issues with the Jaguars offensive line that very commonly get traced to the tackles for God knows why, incorrectly, really, start with AJ Cann. Now, Gardner Minshew and the way he plays, does the same thing that Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson do, where they cause all sorts of issues that their otherwise good offensive lines give up because they're, pass protecting for 10 seconds. But yeah, they need a replacement guard. Now, do they have that on roster? And Ben Barch, third round pick last year? Yeah, maybe. He was okay in the snaps he played. We'll see. But definitely, if there's a starter, the most clear starter in the whole roster outside of quarterback that you can make a big improvement on, given their draft position, is that one. Corner, listen, they're in a position like some other teams have talked about, like the Falcons being the notable one, where they have the players signed in their secondary to put out a decent secondary. But I have very little faith they're actually going to do that, mostly because they signed Shaquille Griffin to a large contract
and that's just a bad contract. He's not really a good player. Doesn't meaningfully affect any actual good receivers, and while he can cover big body guys who wouldn't get open anyway, like a Cortland Sutton or something like that, if you're asking him to cover actual number one receivers in the NFL, Stephon Diggs, Vontae Adams, he's just going to get killed over and over again. Not a fan of that contract at all. Now they do have C.J. Henderson, who has a legitimate chance to be a true number one. Really, really good for a lot of the time he played before he got hurt. Now he does still have some inconsistency issues for sure, but past him, you also have Sidney Jones, who did play better. I frankly should be playing over Shaquille Griffin. He's just a better player, but I don't think they're going to do that. Like I said, given the contract they give Griffin, but we'll see. And then Trey Herndon also at this point, you're fine if he's your fourth, fifth corner. And he was a nice story 2 years ago when the Jags were really bad, and he was the one not horrible spot, but not a player that should be starting really. Again, he's somebody who gets burned against legitimate NFL receivers really consistently. So they need help at corner. Are they going to address that given what they did in the offseason? I think they might already think it's fixed, which should be incorrect, but we'll see. Definitely a need, though. Strong safety. So, yeah, they're horrible there. Rayshawn Jenkins, the signing, and Jared Wilson, you can get mediocre play out of free safety from there, but a strong safety, I will point out, I should say actually though, Daniel Thomas, a rookie out of Auburn last year, showed some things as a replacement safety later in the year to make me think there's a chance he doesn't suck for sure, but we'll see. Just a rookie, didn't play a lot. I'm not going to depend on that. But other than that, they re-signed Jonathan Jones, who is not good as a strong safety. Now, he does some okay things in run support, but he's horrible in coverage. And then they inexplicably still have Andrew Wingard, who I promise you is the worst player in the NFL that got snaps in the last couple of years very comfortably. So, yeah, huge hole there. The other three spots just either easier to improve or more important why they're higher, but this one's a big one too. Tight ends. I actually think they're not quite as screwed there as everybody else seems to. James O'Shaughnessy is actually fits in, that large middle range of tight ends that doesn't matter, but doesn't hurt you by being on the field. Now you can upgrade that spot again very, very easily, just not as important as the ones above it. They also signed Chris Manhertz, who's actually a decent blocking tight end, but definitely one there. Tackle. This is where I have tackle. Like I said, I think way too much blame gets put on the tackles for the Jaguars, Cam Robinson, Jawan Taylor. Now, they're not great, especially Cam Robinson as a pass protector can have issues. Not that Jawan Taylor can't either, but they will be fine in a better offensive environment. I'm very confident, which looks like they're probably going to have this year, hence why I don't have that need that high. Although if Greg Robinson leads, Greg Robinson, that's a little worse of a bit. Cam Robinson. If he leaves now, season, obviously tackle jumps to kind of the top of this list, but still on here, though. You can still have depth. You can still be better there. Edge rotation. This is something normally I would be higher on most teams. This team just still needs a lot of help, but we'll see what they have at the top. Josh Allen, pretty good player. Not a crazy relevant pass rusher, but pretty good. Caleb Monchason. Wasn't super impressed, although he did more things than maybe I was expecting as a rookie, especially towards the end of the year. Dwayne Smoot, not very good, not horrible. Adam Gotsis showed very well as a run defender, but not necessarily a super relevant player. Basically, yeah, just like almost every other team in the NFL, they need relevant pass rushers that they don't necessarily have as of now. Linebacker. This is just about the third spot. They rarely play three linebackers. And maybe, between Leon Jacobs, Dakota Allen, Joe Giles Harris, who actually did some okay things, you can extract okay play out of their linebacker spot. Not super relevant, but that is a spot, again, you can get better. And last, wide receiver. This is more of a depth thing. They have at the top, they're pretty good. DJ Chark's very good. Laviska Shenault's very good. Colin Johnson, as a rookie, was way better than I would have expected him to be. Not that he's necessarily a difference maker, but he's not bad. And then they signed Marvin Jones, who is going to be useful for sure. But that's another spot that going forward they need depth. And frankly, that other spot, outside spot, opposite Chark, you can get better at with a younger player, although not a super huge need. Hence why it's not high on this list. And the one thing I'll mention with the Jags too, is a lot of people think that defensive tackle is a big deal for them. No. Not really. They have now. Don't get me wrong. You could get better there still, but between Roy Robinson Harris, from the Bears, a very good player, Robertson Harris, Malcolm Brown, who's going to be a just fine nose tackle, Devon Hamilton, who is borderline elite as an interior defender as a rookie. You're fine at the top. They can use depth. Obviously, I just would argue all the rest of these are more important. I just want to mention that because a lot of people think that's the Jags' biggest need. It's not. And then we have the Tennessee Titans. And this is a really interesting team to me, to be honest, because I'm very curious what offense they're going to be running. Obviously, with the loss of Arthur Smith, their offensive coordinator, who prior to last year, never super impressed with, but the Titans ended up fitting in with a category, one of those offenses where they just needed kind of marginal good players to succeed. Now they have better than that or had better than that, but very interested with this one. But yeah, obviously as far as needs go, number one so far and away is tackle. They released Dennis Kelly this offseason, which, wow, that's a decision. They obviously the Isaiah Wilson thing, can't necessarily blame them for that one because you never expect something like that. But point is, while they are set on one side with Taylor Lewan, who's really good, on the other side they're not good at all, and they have no one who can play there. So very clearly number one. Number two, wide receiver. They have an elite receiver in A.J. Brown, no question. Past him, they have almost nothing. Bring in Josh Reynolds, who is mediocre at best, not really, just absolutely not a difference maker. Somebody who's going to create separation with any level of consistency. And then you have guys like Nick Westbrook, who I actually think is a little bit okay, but it's just nothing there, and they need talent there for sure, especially if they're going to be running a different offense than what they had last year. Corner. They bring in some guys I actually kind of like, and Kevin Johnson from the Browns I think is pretty good. Janoris Jenkins, who I think was better than people gave credit for his whole time on the Saints. But they have no slot corner with the loss of Desmond King. Christian Fulton is okay, but you can still use depth on the outside, and that's definitely a spot that they get better at, and younger too, because, those top two guys I mentioned, fairly old / on one-year deals at this point. Guard. This is just because Nate Davis ain't that good. He's okay. Definitely was way better last year than he was as a rookie. But a spot you can get better at, again, fairly comfortably. And the last one I have here is edge. Now, you can argue this should be way, way higher, and I'm not necessarily going to argue back against you. I just happen to think that especially the first three are, they're like untenable almost right now. But with edge rusher, right, you have Harold Landry, who can at least do a little bit, and Bud Dupree. And Bud Dupree I'm not a huge fan of, but what I do, and Denico Autry, who I am actually a fairly big fan of, what they do provide, depending on how they play defense, is a look that's similar to the way that a team like the Rams plays, where they're very dependent on the interior, but they can work because they have good interior players. Now here, Titans, not super good on the interior, and actually skipped defensive tackle, I'm noticing now. They have one borderline elite guy. Jeffrey Simmons is really, really, really good. Past him, though, you have a true fat nose tackle, Daquan Jones, and a player who flashed a little bit in T.R. Tart. But they need other pieces of the interior. Or on the edge, basically they're missing a big pass rusher. I happen to think these other things are more important at the moment. But, Titans, could they be good? Yeah, maybe. Really going to depend on the way they run their team next year. Obviously, that goes for a lot of teams. But, that's AFC South in this division. A lot of holes all over these rosters.